A very common problem with getting into a role like tanking, which tends to have a lot of responsibility in a party, is that spotlight that shines on the tank at the front of the party. It makes it painfully obvious for others if you are making mistakes. And that is often what leads to this thing we know as Tanxiety or tank anxiety. This fear of failure or the uncertain can often lead players to never even try tanking. And while that is perfectly okay, tanking is not for everyone. I know some players that discovered once they overcame their Tanxiety that it was actually their favorite role. In fact, just to start, I know tank and healer mains that somehow have DPS anxiety because they're afraid of not performing, quote, well enough, unquote. So realizing that all of us can have a fear of not being good enough might already be a good start. But knowing that is often not enough when the Tanxiety originated from being afraid of failure in the first place. So how do we deal with that? So I believe that the most effective way to combat Tanxiety is to build knowledge on the role and to build confidence in your ability to do it. One of these things requires you to actually play the role. The other one you might be able to build just by learning from others. So with that, I will suggest some ways I think you might be able to combat your Tanxiety with. Maybe you can use this knowledge to also help a friend overcome their Tanxiety. Who knows? Regardless, what exactly makes each individual afraid of tanking can vary, so it is perfectly understandable if not all of my suggestions help each person. But maybe just one of them will help you. Now, to start, knowing the basics of the role, and perhaps even the specific tank you have decided to play, can help a ton with picking up the role in the first place. The easiest way to go about this is, for example, to read or watch a guide on tanking. Turns out that tanking well is almost more about how you pull things and how you place them once you have pulled them than how much it is about using your defensive cooldowns. Although that is also a significant factor. Naturally, I have both guides for tanking and starter guides for every tank in the game, up to date, that you can find on this channel if you need them. The reason why watching or reading a guide on the subject might help is that once you are in the dungeon and you are the tank, maybe you don't actually know what you're supposed to be doing or how you should do it. Having read or watched a guide on the subject at least gives you a strong idea of exactly what you should watch for. It removes some of the mystery from your first go at the role. My second suggestion is that often the Tanxiety originates from the fear of failure in front of other people, or the fear of those other people judging you for said failure. Sometimes it can also just be the fact that you don't want to look bad in front of strangers. To combat this, I recommend making use of the duty support feature, which allows you to do most dungeons with a party of NPCs. Granted, these NPCs are significantly inferior to the average player. However, they will not judge you, and because they are underperforming, it also puts more emphasis on your own ability. If you work your way up to pull bigger packs with NPCs in tow, you will notice that it is a lot more about you knowing what to do than anything else. Because that healer NPC cannot help you if you can't stay up on your own. And the DPS are not cleaving, so most of the area of effect damage originates from you. Alternatively, if you have a group of friends to play with, this isn't always the case, then bring 3 friends to practice dungeons with. You can get even more out of this if you have a friend who is also learning how to heal. That way, neither of you in particular is carrying the other one, painting over obvious mistakes and the like. My third suggestion is to start with lower level dungeons to practice. This might be incredibly obvious if you're starting with Warrior or Paladin, but I still do recommend doing this with Dark Knight or Gunbreaker, despite them starting at a higher level. The lower level dungeons are far more lenient, and because you don't have nearly as many buttons, you can focus on the basics. For example, in Sastasha, while most of the tanks do have an offensive cooldown, their rotations boil down to a 1-2 combo and a single button for area of effect, meaning that the rest of your buttons are utility or defense. At the same time, you will also have less cooldowns to access, and your healer will have less options to save you with, of course. but this combination means that you have far more space to learn the basics of the role. The biggest difference between tanking a dungeon at level 90 and a dungeon at level 18 is that at higher levels you have more options and your attacks are more complex. But the basics of the role are all the same. At higher levels, enemies also expect more of you, and things seem to go a bit faster at least. Now, something I feel might be worth addressing is also the idea of working your way up to pulling bigger amounts of enemies. This might sound backwards, but as long as you aren't pulling like unreasonably large packs, bigger than what the common group does, then pulling multiple packs is actually somehow safer than pulling very little at times. How can this be? You can view a dungeon run as a lead and follow dance, and the tank is the leader and everyone else is the follower. For the follower to be able to keep up with what the leader is doing, the leader has to be predictable. If you pull packs in the way that most tanks do, then most DPS and healers can play in a consistent way. Instead of trying to get really smart about it with your defensives, such as sitting on Warrior's Blood waiting until you're almost dead and the healer has already spent all of their cooldowns saving you, simply using Bloodwetting when it's there makes it predictable, meaning the healer can rely on you using it on cooldown, allowing them to plan their cooldowns better. By not moving too erratically once you've reached your destination in a pull, your DPS can rely on you, and so the mobs, staying where they are throughout the pull, making them have an easier time doing damage. This also extends to boss fights, where the tank is generally advised to stand as still as possible so the boss doesn't spin. You still do want to dodge boss mechanics, of course. What I mean by this is, as a fourth suggestion, that tanking isn't such a big brain role as you might think. Getting too smart with the role can also be detrimental, as that can also make you unpredictable. This is also part of the reason why often when the tank uses an invulnerability as part of its defensive lineup, it can be confusing, because not all tanks do this, meaning that the average healer isn't expecting it. And finally, for my fifth suggestion, as I said at the start, Tanxiety can often be rooted in a fear of failure or a lack of confidence. And tanking is, weirdly, a lot about confidence. Not that you have to have confidence, but that you have to look like you do. If you do a massive pull right at the outset of a dungeon, and you nail it, and the healer feels comfortable with you doing that, that lets everyone know that you're very confident. But that requires you to already know how to do such a pull in the first place, and faking it might not be enough. Similarly, the fear of failure, I imagine, can stem from the fact that sometimes there is an angry person in the group who can get very vocal if something goes wrong. The best I can suggest against this is that these kinds of players are typically the minority and, by the way, in the wrong. If you just fail the pull and they start berating you for that, that doesn't help you or them because that breaks your confidence, making you possibly play worse. So, if that happens, try to not let it get to you, as ultimately they are the one making a mistake now. With that said, the worst thing that can happen if you make a mistake and fail as a tank is that you wipe. That's it. Then you just go again. When I pull extremely big, and sometimes my healer can't take it, we wipe. I just say sorry and suggest pulling less, and then we move on. Nothing scary about it. Add to this that if you let your team know that you are rather new to tanking before the dungeon starts, then players tend to be a lot more lenient and not worry as much about your mistakes. In fact, some healers will be extra aware of catching you if you fall, because you warned them that you're less reliable by letting them know you are less skilled. For example, a skilled tank you'd expect to use their invulnerability if something goes wrong and they're near death. However, you cannot expect this consistency from a newer tank. The invulnerability might be the last thing you think of when you're in danger, because it isn't in the arsenal of tools you'd normally use. You are still learning the bread and butter tools of the job. So by simply letting the group know that you might not know everything, the group can more easily play around that. You essentially flag to the team that you are predictably unpredictable, which is better than saying nothing. And if all of that was a bit overwhelming, just know that if you only took one tip with you from this video. I hope that it was the fact that the worst that can happen if you fail is that you wipe, and you can always just go again. With that said, maybe you yourself don't have Tanxiety, or maybe you're working on it and you have found ways to work through this issue yourself. I would love to hear about those ways in the comments. If you are having a hard time starting and you need a bit of advice, then maybe the comment section can also help you. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to support me and my channel, you can let the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. And if you want to give even more support than that, you can also become a member of the channel like these wonderful people here. Fun fact, several of the first dungeons in Final Fantasy XIV are tuned so low that it is perfectly possible for a single person to solo them, synced. In fact, apparently a black mage with a large sack of potions can solo Sastasha, and also get a nice cardio exercise out of it.